Buying or selling a home? It's more than a transaction. It's a strategy. I'm Amy Lynn, and I bring clarity, confidence, and results to your real estate journey. Whether you're searching for the perfect place to call home or preparing to list your home for top dollar, I've got you covered. With smart marketing, strong negotiation, and a network you can trust, I don't just help clients close, I help them win. Let's make your next move the right one.
To the Let's Talk Short Track Racing podcast. We're on episode 16, and today I am joined by Jake Wilson, voice of the Freedom Factory. You have quite the announcing career, and I'm very excited to have you on the podcast and to co-host with me tonight.
I'm excited I got the call this week. I'm no Frank, but I'll definitely be able to try to fill his shoes here tonight, and I appreciate you guys reaching out and giving me the opportunity to come on here and talk a little short track racing. But biggest thing is the topic that we have here tonight. This is just awesome to have the opportunity to come on here and talk a little short track racing and talk about a guy who has had an incredible career and impacted a lot of lives and a lot of careers, and some guy that I looked up to a lot as a little kid. So excited to get to talk about Mike Eddy here tonight.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about Mike Eddy, his career, and hear from some of his fellow competitors. Like a vast majority or a large crowd of them are going to be calling in tonight, and I can't wait to hear about how Mike impacted their careers and how they grew friendships.
I listen to a lot of sports podcasts, and a lot of the mainstream media nowadays. They want to create the Mount Rushmore of this sport or the Mount Rushmore of that sport. If you're wanting to do that in the ASA series from back in the 70s, 80s, and then up into the 90s, it's pretty hard to limit it to just 4 drivers. But I think it's pretty safe to say any one of the drivers or any one of the guys that we're going to have on here tonight could very easily be in their own category of a Mount Rushmore, and of course Mike Eddy as well. I'm a kid of the 90s. I grew up in the 90s. I didn't get to watch Mike race in the 70s and 80s. But in the 90s, when I first was getting into ASA racing, Mike was the man. He was already a 7-time champion by the time I started recognizing and realizing what was going on with the ASA series. But some of the drivers that we're going to have on a little bit later on here tonight, these are guys that they pushed each other so hard, on the racetrack to make the ASA series what it was back in the 70s, to then grow into the 80s and then get those big TV contracts that we got to see in the 90s where, kids like myself got to, not only root for the guys on Sundays in the Cup Series, but also got to follow the ASA Series too.
Yeah, it's really incredible, and I'm really excited to hear all of the stories and stuff. And I think maybe just for a second, let's go ahead and introduce a little bit about who Mike was, just for those watching who are younger that don't know his career as well.
Yeah, so Mike Eddy, driver from Michigan, who raced primarily up in the Midwest early on in his career, but you see him start to kind of branch out and venture out throughout the country, and he really becomes kind of a household name, not only just in the Midwest, but in short track racing in general. Goes on to have this just amazing career in the ASA Series. He's second all-time in wins, only to Bob Senneker, but he's a 7-time champion, the only driver that was able to. 7's a pretty important number when it comes to racing. Talk about in NASCAR with Richard Petty, with Dale Earnhardt, and of course with Jimmy Johnson. Well, Mike Eddy has that same number and that same repertoire in the ASA Series. And for Mike, it wasn't just instant success. It was just an extensive longevity of career. He's got championships in 3 different decades in the ASA Series, and that to me is what stands out. And we'll talk with some of our guests here tonight about how the cars changed over the years. They weren't just the same, rolling out the same kind of cars every year. They went through some pretty major changes, how the cars looked, how they ran, and Mike and his guys always seemed to find a way to adapt to whatever the new car was going to be like, and found their way not only to victory lane, but hosting a championship trophy at the end of the year.
Yeah, his career, and thinking about how many wins, and I was reading some stats too, just the number of laps he's led is incredible.
Yeah.
Because, you can't, you can easily, not easily, but you can win a ton of races but not lead that many laps. That is possible, but he did show his dominance not only in wins but laps led. And
what was impressive too with the ASA Series back, dating back to the 70s and 80s, going to a bunch of different types of racetracks, not just your typical quarter-mile bull ring or maybe your little 3/8 mile. No, these tracks were all different, all shapes and sizes, banking, and things like that. And Mike found success at a lot of different racetracks, and he was never just kind of like a one-track jack kind of racer, to where anywhere the series went, when that 88 rolled off the trailer, he was going to be a threat to win. It didn't matter. And if you were going to try to win, you were going to have to try to beat the 88 that night. Yeah, which is was a hard task for a lot of drivers. But for some of the guys that are calling here tonight, they did have success. Yeah. And so that to me is what makes it even more impressive. Again, the longevity of his career, the different types of racers that he had to compete with, guys that would go on to become future NASCAR Cup Series champions, and guys that he would share the racetrack here in the ASA Series with for the better part of 30 years that he would continue to compete with. And we're going to get to hear from some of those guys here tonight. Yeah, so should we go ahead and introduce who our first guest here in a few minutes is going to be? Yeah, it's some guy, I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not. He was a 4-time ASA Series champion, but he's also a NASCAR Hall of Famer. It's Mark Martin, a driver that got to compete with Mike. Started running against Mike in the late 70s. Mark's a driver that found some success very early on in the ASA Series, which then led him into the NASCAR Cup Series early on into the 1980s. And Mark has talked about it, several times through several podcasts and different stories. Mark struggled when he got to the Cup Series initially. He then found himself coming back to the ASA Series in the mid-80s, won another championship, started winning races, and that's what propelled him to the eventual, Hall of Fame NASCAR career that he would eventually have. And it's the foundation that he laid in the ASA Series and racing against guys like Mike that kind of pushed him to become the driver that he became. And I can't wait to hear from Mark here and just some of the stories that he'll be able to tell us about racing and battling it out on the racetrack with Mike, and what it did to push him to become that driver that he became. Yeah, it's going to be really cool to hear all those stories. So we will have Mark on right after this commercial break.
Hi, my name is Joe Constance with Joe's Racing Products. My company has been producing high-quality racing components in the USA for over 30 years. We know the commitment and determination it takes to win races because we race too. We're determined to produce quality products that can help you get to the finish line first. Ask your dealer for Joe's Racing Products or visit us online at joesracing.com.
Buying or selling a home? It's more than a transaction, it's a strategy. I'm Amy Lynn, and I bring clarity, confidence, and results to your real estate journey. Whether you're searching for the perfect place to call home or preparing to list your home for top dollar, I've got you covered. With smart marketing, strong negotiation, and a network you can trust, I don't just help clients close, I help them win. Let's make your next move the right one.
Welcome back to the Let's Talk Short Track Racing podcast. We are back live now. We've got Mark Martin here on the phone with us.
Mark, we appreciate you taking some time to come on here and chat with us here tonight. Obviously, we wish we were speaking under some better circumstances. The entire short track world was rocked last week when we found out that Mike Eddy had passed away, and a driver that you spent a lot of your formidable years of racing competing against, winning races, winning championships against him, but a driver that, you know, for the better part there of the 70s and in the 80s, you were two drivers that were certainly up there at the front of the field in the ASA series. I don't even know where to begin, just from the rivalry aspect of you guys, but just kind of from your perspective, what was it like to race against a guy like Mike for so long, like as you did?
It was intense. Mike Eddy was intense. Man, he was a no-nonsense competitor. He was there for just a little while before I got there. He was already running the paved tracks up in Wisconsin and Indiana and stuff, or Michigan and Indiana and whatnot. And he answered my questions. He didn't seem to be overly secretive. He seemed like someone that either he expected he would beat me or otherwise. I guess maybe he was just a good sport and figured the best man win. But Mike and I always got along. Mike was friendly enough all the time, except for the one time I wiped him out with 5 laps to go at Winchester for the Winchester 400 in 1980. I wasn't very happy with me that day. But yeah, Mike was super, super intense, and being no nonsense on or off the track, he definitely would. He'd put the fender to you in a heartbeat if you didn't respect him and give him enough room. But he and I never had a problem, other than the time I lost control on the inside of him that one race at Winchester. I had seen Mike coming, and I knew not to hold him up. Otherwise you might get clobbered. And you know, but at the same time, he raced me back the same way. He raced hard, but he raced me fair. He didn't typically hold me up. And we had a lot of great racing. I have a lot of respect, always did have a lot of respect for Mike because, he was a student of Ed Howe. And of course, Ed was a total genius in the early and mid '70s to come up with with the chassis package that he did and all. And Mike was pretty close with Ed and learned a lot. And of course, when I started pavement racing, I went up and got a Howe car because that's what you had to have. So Mike and I were running pretty much the same stuff in '77, especially in '78. '78, '79, and '80, we went head to head for the championship for all three of those years. And in the first 2 years, '78, '79, I was in a Howe package as well. So we ran similar stuff. We ran, was a time early on when we both ran Firestone tires. And, but he got onto the Goodyears a lot sooner than I did. But, if I had a question about anything, about tires or anything else, I was curious, and that's how I learned. I would ask Mike or Bob Senneker or whoever it might be. I asked them all questions about whatever because I was trying to absorb and learn as fast as I could. Mike always answered my questions. He never really seemed to try to evade or anything, and I always respected that because he raced you like a animal on the racetrack, man. But he was a fair and nice guy off the racetrack as well as on the racetrack.
Yeah. I know for you, Mark, you may not have got to earn a college degree, but you got to go to the University of Racing there, and you got to learn from professors named Senneker and Trickle and Eddy, which really shaped you, into your formidable years that got you into NASCAR, and then, coming back to the ASA series again in the mid '80s to then, kind of vault you up into the, Hall of Fame type career you had into the late '80s and through the '90s and well on to the rest of your career. But when did Mike first kind of come onto the radar with you? Would it have been when you were heading down to run at New Smyrna maybe the first time, or was it when you, fully committed to go run in the ASA tour and moved up into the Midwest?
Oh no, it was so we went and got the Howe car in December of '76 and planned on going to New Smyrna for Speed Weeks in '77. And so we put the car together, took our lessons from Ed, which will be well documented in my book that we're writing right now. Hilarious story, two stories hilarious about that adventure and our interaction with Ed. But when we went down to New Smyrna in February, Mike was there, and boom, he was on my radar. He was running the same chassis, and I believe he was running the same tires as we were running at the time. And I took notice and was paying attention then, and then throughout my '77 was my rookie season in ASA. And Mike was, I bet he won the championship. No, I think Dave Watson won the championship, but Mike was winning races already. And, I hadn't won a race yet, so I was still sponging. And I had a lot of eyes on Mike because I liked the way he operated. No nonsense, get out of the way, give me my tape measure, jack the car up. Let's see what the stagger is.
Yeah, very old school and true to his style. What do you think really impressed you the most with his career?
I think probably, I'm not sure what year. I think it was maybe his fifth championship. in the interview afterwards where he said, and I get it because I was there when he was winning races and winning races with the Munning brothers, and they were from Columbus, Indiana, and Mike was from Michigan. So I don't think Mike was working on the car at that time. And when he did this particular interview, he said, this one means the most to me. He said, I built the car, I worked on the car, I did this. And I think, without virtually any help, other than the volunteer guys that came to the racetrack. Mike was just, he was a grinder, man, and he ground it out. So I wasn't there, but I'm sure people can vouch that would say, yeah, Mike maintained the car himself. He did all that stuff himself. And that was, that was kind of the Mike that I saw in 77, was a guy that was doing it all himself. I was too young to do it all myself, but by 79, I just had a couple helpers, and we were all just out there racing. So, it's old school, and you don't see that anymore. But that one, that's what sticks out. That's what I think about when I think of Mike Eddy. I think of a guy that just, would knock the door off the hinges coming through. He's almost like a bull. I mean, he's big, burly, and I'm glad he didn't come looking to pound me in 1980 at Winchester.
Mark, can you speak to just the longevity of his career and winning championships in 3 different decades, and just how much the series changed, how the cars changed over time, and how the series continued to grow? I mean, it just still blows me away if you go back and you look at some of the finishes and the results, and some of the guys that you guys were racing with were just, the fields were incredible. What does it say to his longevity to have the success that he did at the early days of the ASA, and to carry it all the way up through, into the early 90s and the mid 90s when they're signing TV deals and they're into everybody's living room? Because I'm a kid of the 90s, and as much as I loved watching you guys run on Sundays, man, I loved when I could turn on TNN and there was ASA racing from Jennerstown or from Anderson, or I can't tell you how excited I was when I found out that ASA was coming to race at my local track in Bradenton. I mean, just what can you speak of the longevity and how he always stayed committed to the ASA series and was there for so long through all the changes?
Well, it was interesting that Mike committed to ASA and stayed with it because, early on, like I committed to it too in 78 and 79 and 80. And it was my first priority. And then I filled in for the extra money races where I could, or in and around that schedule. But ASA was epic at the time, and it was all the way through the 90s. And Mike made his career happen with his dirty hands. And that is heroic to me. That's just really special. But the things that made that happen in the late 70s and early 80s and up through the mid 80s, even when you got into the 90s, it was nothing like what it was. And it almost, it required such a different knowledge set than what we had early in our early years, or my early years when I raced with Mike. The cars were so much different. You had the radial tire, you had the little engines. The chassis were just, had evolved so much in such a different way. The cars were so close in speed because they were so alike that, not everyone could adapt to that new, to that new formula that it took to win those races. And And of course, Mike was he was good at chasing points and good at championships because he ran good all the time. He almost never, was off. He was always on, and he was good at finishing races. But at the same time, he was extremely aggressive. Mike, would have in my early years of NASCAR would have made a spectacular NASCAR driver. Mike's, his skill, his determination, his commitment was similar to Dale Earnhardt's, and that's why it's kind of ironic that Goodwrench wound up being, his sponsor in the late years of ASA. But Mike would have made a fantastic NASCAR driver until it got overly commercialized. And then I don't know that Mike would have been a fan of that part of it, because Mike was certainly a no-nonsense guy. And I love Mike Eddy for that.
I'm glad you made that correlation there, Mark, because we were just looking at some pictures there of that 88 Goodwrench car, because I can remember turning the TV on and I said, I'm looking at looking over at my dad. I'm like, that's the same kind of car Dale Earnhardt drives. He doesn't quite have the mustache like Dale does, but you know what? He sure drives like him.
Yeah, he did.
Now, Mark, we kind of were talking about the comparison of NASCAR with ASA. Through your experience, kind of starting with ASA, going to NASCAR for a little bit, and then coming back to the ASA series, what do you think that level of competition was like between the two?
Well, when I unfortunately, I was naive because I won in everything immediately as a kid, and I accidentally won Rookie of the Year in '77 when I was not even chasing the ASA circuit. I just accidentally ran enough races to be eligible for Rookie of the Year. So it just made sense to chase the championship in '78 because my goal was to win the Daytona 500 by the time I was 25. So, man, I won the championship the first time at it. First at it, 78. Won it again in 79, won it again in 80. And so I built a cup car that was built off of all the principles of my ASA cars, my late models. And, it fit all the NASCAR rules, but it was tricked out. I mean, nobody had a car that was that lightweight. Two gauges, no tack. Nobody usually had 8 gauges in the tack and all this junk, huge coolers and all this junk. And I built a shortcut car. I went and sat on 2 poles in 5 races and finished 3rd and 7th with my ASA pit crew.
Yeah.
So I thought this shit was going to be easy. Looked like it was going to be easy.
Yeah.
I didn't have a big sponsor, and I had that one car, and I was buying one more car, and so I was going to go NASCAR racing with 2 cars up against Junior Johnson and Bud Moore and all those guys like that. And I had no money sponsor, but I thought, well, I'm going to win a race in the first 5 races or so. It looked like I would.
Yeah.
And so I just waited in. I thought, man, I'll run so good, this will take care of itself. And I was naive. I had no idea. I didn't grow up around NASCAR racing. I'd never been in the pits of a NASCAR race. I didn't know what I was getting into. I went to Daytona with 1 car for the Daytona 500, the first race of the year, and Junior Johnson had 7 cars painted and lettered and decaled, ready to go, and I had 1. And it was I just didn't know what I was getting into. And, I raced all year in middle pack cars, equipment, and I learned to drive my butt off big time, harder than I'd ever driven in my life. But at the end of the year, I was in so much debt that I had to have an auction and sell everything I owned. And I said, I'll never be a car owner again. And the phone never rang. Well, it did. I got a cup ride I made it 7 races, finished 3rd and 7th in those first 7 races too, and it still got fired. And I was on my butt, had nothing. And when I came back to ASA in '84, after leaving in '81, I was behind. Number one. Number two, I had nothing, and Ray Dillon told me, Mark, the days of free cars are over. And I was crushing. I had no money. What was I supposed to do? But I had to race. That's what I did. That's who I was. So yes, I did, I fought hard and struggled. I squeaked out one ASA race in '84, and then we won 4 in '85, but we broke a bunch of Ford motors. And then in '86, we had a great season and won the championship. But in '86, I had, premier equipment. I was driving for Jerry Gunnerman and working with Jimmy and Jeffrey Finnig, and I had the best stuff, anybody could ask for. But at that point, Bobby Allison was nagging Jimmy to come crew chief his cup car. And Jimmy told me, he says, I'm staying if you're staying. And I'm like, dude, I got a chance to go bush racing. I think I'll go do that. There's no way that you're going to pass up on the chance to be a cup crew chief. So that's kind of the story of how that went. But it was a struggle for 2 years for me to get back to where I could win again in the ASA series.
Yeah, Mark, you're a remarkable story in the fact that you got your first opportunity to go cup racing, and then you had an opportunity to go after it again and continue to chase your dream, and man, you made the most of it. But I got to ask you too, because you've always been a driver that has always really been able to evaluate talent, and you've always been able to kind of scope out who you think the next up-and-coming really good driver would be. And I know a big talk right now with some of the drivers that are coming up through the short track ranks and are even kind of in the lower levels of NASCAR right now is to a point the loss of race etiquette and how drivers are supposed to race each other. We see it, on some of the streams and some of the races at our local short tracks, and heck, we're unfortunately we're seeing it sometimes in some of the Cup Series races. Where do you think, if you could steer a young driver, kind of going back to Mike Eddy, some of the things that Mike would teach, or if you ever saw Mike ever, go up to a driver and be like, that's not the way we need to do things. How important do you think it is for a young driver to know the history of the sport and learn about a driver like Mike and the etiquette that you guys used to race with in the ASA days?
Well, I think it's extremely important to know the history. I should have known more about the history of the sport when I came into NASCAR. It would have probably saved me a complete and total failure. But also, I hung out at numerous social events in 1982 with Tim Flock. Yes, that's right. Tim Flock, the guy that raced and won races with a monkey in the car.
Yep.
Riding with him. And my sorry, young, dumb ass did not ask him a one single question about his racing. And it would have been interesting, but it would have made Tim Flock feel like a true hero. And I regret that I didn't give him that respect and that feeling that I could have gave him to being interested in someone who came well before me. And so that part of it is important. I think I like Corey Heim, and I don't have contact with Corey, but I would like to tell him, don't draw the first blood. And I'm seeing, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing Corey not doing the dirty stuff till he gets done to him.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I like to say about Kyle Busch. Some people want to complain about Kyle Busch being rough or dirt, and I'm like, dude, he's not. I've never seen Kyle draw first blood.
No.
He races hard, but he never put a fender on me. Actually, Earnhardt almost never put a fender on me.
Yeah.
he might have once or twice. I actually put one on him once. So, I mean, we raced hard, but you can race hard and race fair. The problem is that, well, there's a lot of problems, but one of the big problems is, like Mike Eddy, like myself, and like so many, and Bob Senneker and Dick Trickle, these kids today didn't build those cars in their garage themselves or with some helpers, and they don't fix them when they tear them up. That's one problem. And there's a culture now, from driving on, iRacing or whatever, simulation or whatever, where the result of an accident, are have no consequences.
Yeah, hit the reset button.
And yeah, and so that's not a good culture in itself. The cars are harder to pass today than they ever were. And so using the bumper is a little bit more commonplace, which it was a total no-no in our day. Totally. You never touched any, in fact, there was no front bumper on my car. Although the years that I won those championships in 78, 79, 80, especially in 1980, there wasn't anything but something that held on the plastic and nose of it. And so you have all these components, and it's just evolved to where it is. And unfortunately, it's almost as bad at the top of stock car racing, which is NASCAR Cup racing, as it is in the short tracks. And I was at the Joe Shear Classic a month and a half ago or so, however long it was, and I saw some of the hardest, cleanest racing I've seen in a long time at that race, and it really made me feel good, and it energized me. But there's a rule. Without the rule, you might not have that. Unfortunately, I also saw, I saw someone go to the back that made a little minor mistake, on the racetrack that caused, someone to lose control, and so he had to go to the back too for an innocent mistake. And you hate to have that, but I would rather have what I saw at the Joe Shear Classic than I would, running over each other. It's a little bit of rubbing, a little bit of bump and run is okay. That gets people's blood flowing. That's today, that's auto racing in today's age. But, just robbing a guy, just running over him, when there's no chance you'd ever pass him and you just run in there and pile into the back of him, it's just disgusting. And I hate to see that.
Yep. Well, Mark, we appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us here tonight. Really quickly, just want to give a quick shout out. You are a fantastic follow on social media, so I encourage anybody that's not following Mark on X, go ahead and follow Mark. And I love keeping up with all the projects that you have going on, what you and Matt are doing, working on your book and the great projects that you guys have been working on for years. I'm really looking forward to keep up with all that. But I have to ask real quick, I'm wearing my Freedom Factory shirt down here. Cletus, he likes to race some Crown Vics every now and again, and you're a name that's been popping up a little bit as somebody that could potentially come down and run maybe Freedom 500 with us. What do you think about maybe either texting or calling your buddy Greg Biffle and seeing about getting you down there to Bradenton to race a Crown Vic there at Freedom Factory?
It's on my radar screen. I've been seeing what's going on, and I'm keeping track of it. Never say never. I've been trying to stay out of the driver's seat, but it seems like that driver's seat keeps getting closer to me with time. So you never know. But hey, I do want to give a shout out to all the people who love short track racing. My heart is totally with the late model pavement culture and the heroes, from Michigan and Indiana and Wisconsin and all that stuff. And I just want to make sure everybody knows that I'm going to be at Wisconsin International June 19th, that Thursday night, signing autographs at the track. and for that race, it's probably my second favorite racetrack. In short track, late model racing was Kaukauna, and I love the Wisconsin race fans, and can't wait to see everybody up there.
Awesome.
That's awesome, Mark. Well, again, we could thank you a million times, and it still wouldn't be enough. So we appreciate you coming on here, and we're looking forward to seeing all the great things that you've got coming up. And we appreciate you coming on here and sharing some wisdom with us, and of course talking about our guy Mike Eddy, and just the great guy he was, the great racer he was, the great competitor that he was.
Thank you. My pleasure to be on with you guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Here on Let's Talk Short Track Racing, we're going to take a quick break, and coming up on the other side, there's only one other driver that went to victory lane more in the ASA series than Mike Eddy, and that would be Bob Senneker. So we're going to be coming back here in just a bit after this commercial break.
Buying or selling a home? It's more than a transaction. It's a strategy. I'm Amy Lynn, and I bring clarity, confidence, and results to your real estate journey. Whether you're searching for the perfect place to call home or preparing to list your home for top dollar, I've got you covered. With smart marketing, strong negotiation, and a network you can trust, I don't just help clients close, I help them win. Let's make your next move the right one.
Hi, my name is Joe Constance with Joe's Racing Products. My company has been producing high-quality racing components in the USA for over 30 years. We know the commitment and determination it takes to win races because we race too. We're determined to produce quality products that can help you get to the finish line first. Ask your dealer for Joe's Racing Products or visit us online at joesracing.com.
Welcome back to the Let's Talk Short Track Racing podcast. On the phone with us now, we have Bob Senneker. Bob is the only driver, as we mentioned right before we went to break, he's the only driver to have more wins than Mike Eddy.
Yeah, Bob, we appreciate you taking time to come on here and talk with us. We wish we were talking about something a little bit better here this week. We wish we were just straight up talking racing, but unfortunately I know we were all hit pretty hard when we found out that Mike had passed away last week. And just kind of quickly, you guys, an incredible, I don't know if rivalry is the right word, but man, you guys were just incredible competitors for years and years and years in the ASA series, and you kind of built like a natural rivalry just from the longevity of both of your careers. What can you kind of talk about some of your early memories of competing in the ASA series and getting to race against Mike, and how that evolved and how that grew throughout the years from the 70s into the 80s, and for both of you racing, late into the 90s?
Yeah, well, I'm sure I forgot much more than I remember about any of that racing, but I think I met Mike before ASA at Auburn Speedway, and he was running a Howe car there. He was always associated with Howe. started there, and then he started ASA, I think, maybe a year or so before I did. And from then on, it was a battle. He was one of the strongest competitors I ever run against.
Yeah, Bob, I'm looking back through. I was looking back through your career with racing against Mike, and I couldn't believe it. There were 19 times that you guys finished first and second racing with each other, dating, going all the way back into the mid to late 70s, then all the way up through the end of your career in the 90s. Was it just natural for you two to find each other on the racetrack? I mean, a lot of times it was right up at the front of the field, competing for wins and competing for championships. How did that kind of grow throughout the years in terms of the competitiveness between you and your teams? Was it always kind of setting a benchmark where it's like, if we're going to be competitive, if we're going to win, we've got to be able to outrun that 88 this week?
Yeah, that's the way it seemed. It was either the 84 or the 88 at that time. Of course, all the other ones were in there too, but a lot of times it just came down to Mike and me, and we swapped it back and forth. And, things always went pretty well. We'd rub doors now and then, and then we'd party afterwards. It was a lot of fun back there in early ASA.
Yeah. So what do you think made the both of you so competitive with each other? What was kind of like that level playing field?
That's a hard question to answer. I don't know. We both did our own thing. We didn't peek at each other's cars, steal secrets that I know of, but we were always pretty much equal. I think he might have been a little more aggressive than I was, so he would win with his aggression. I would win sometimes with my patience. But usually when it got down to the end of the race, it's who could figure out how to get by who.
Looking back and seeing all the success that you had, the 85 wins in the ASA series is just remarkable in your 390 starts that you made. Mike had the edge in championships. You had the edge in wins. Did you guys ever have like a friendly banter ever back and forth talking about, I'd trade a few more of these wins for maybe one of those championships or vice versa? What were you and Mike, what was your relationship like, kind of not necessarily away from the racetrack, but just kind of like outside the race car and kind of interacting with each other?
Well, early on, we got along fine. We'd talk back and forth about how the race was going the week before or something like that. But like I said, I forget more than I remember on that stuff anymore.
Well, I loved looking back at all the battles that you guys have had. I've been trying to find as many. Looking back, we've got some great pictures of you guys racing back in the day. Whether it was at Winchester, some incredible battles between you guys at Berlin. Is there any one moment in your career that stands out where you were maybe kind of happy, or where you're like, I got him this day. This was my day. Is there that one moment that stands out to you, or is it several moments possibly?
Oh, I'm sure there were several, but there's one that I'll probably never forget, and neither will all the other fans. This started out in Calgary. I don't remember what year it was, but we were getting down near the end of the race, and I was pushing Mike. It was just he and I were out front, and I was on his bumper. About 1 or 2 laps to go, and I wiggled my way under him, and going down on the first and second turn, and wiggled my way under there, and we were side by side going down the back stretch, and I'm thinking, this might not be good. Mike don't like being rubbed.
No.
So I went on to win, and after the race, Mike come down and had a little short talk with me, showing his disappointment. And then, a few weeks later, we raced some other places. And at Berlin, where the crowd is like a football stadium there, they really get excited. And maybe most of the fans were mine, and then the smaller portion was his. And I think I was getting ready to pass him. I don't know if I was going for the lead or what, but he blatantly turned me around just in the middle of everything. There's no doubt about it. He was paying me back. And I don't remember the outcome of the race. If I even finished, I don't recall, but I know it took me out of contention, that's for sure. And the fans went crazy. He had to have a police escort to get out of the place.
Yeah, we've seen a few of those in our Saturday nights where we've been at our local tracks here for sure. But I know I got to ask another thing too. Is we had Mark Martin on here earlier, and one thing that got brought up, we talked about longevity, and you and Mike, you were both just ASA mainstays. You both had opportunities, to go cup racing and to potentially jump into that next level, but you two were really kind of the bannermen that carried ASA from the 70s in through the 80s, whereas a lot of drivers that had success in the 80s, they would then move on to the Cup Series. You guys stayed loyal to the series and watched it grow into what it became in the 90s, getting, bigger TV contracts, going to different parts of the country and going to, different venues and different markets. What did it mean for a driver like you and for Mike to both kind of have that longevity in the sport and to see it go from where it was in those, mid to late 70s to carry it all the way, towards the end of your career in the late 90s there?
Yeah, it just made it more and more interesting every weekend. I look forward to it more than I ever did, the year before. It just seemed like it kept getting better and better. And, there's always Mike and I, it seemed like. And, we just kept that show going. And Rex Robbins did a heck of a job of keeping that association exciting. The rules were good. The racers were good. The crowds were good. We were really happy racing that system.
Yeah, and kind of similar question too. You were there in the ASA series for so long. You saw so many different changes from the car to the body style to driving styles. What do you think was the biggest transition throughout your time there?
Well, going to the required chassis, it was just the center cage mainly.
Yep.
Which we all kind of fought for a while. We didn't think that was right, but it turned out to be the best thing that happened. We could still do our own suspension front and back, but we had to have that safe roll cage. And that turned out to be a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, we appreciate you coming on here and spending a little time with us. Want to leave folks here with a little last remark here with in regards to Mike and his legacy. And if a young race fan were to come up to you and be like, "What can you tell me about Mike Eddy? What kind of person was he? What kind of competitor was he? What's the lasting impression? What's that lasting image that you have of Mike that you would share to a young racer or a young race fan?"
Well, I don't know how he did it, but he always seemed to get like 110% out of his car, and everybody else would be just getting 100 or less. He could always seem like he could pull something out of his hat with that car. Man. And Patty and I want to send our condolences to the Mike family, Patty and the boys.
Yeah,
it's really sad to lose a loved one.
Absolutely. Well, Bob, we appreciate you taking some time to come on here and chat with us a little bit here tonight. Best of luck. I know you guys are still making your rounds. I know a lot of fans love seeing you anytime you show up at a racetrack. Got anything coming up in the future here that you want to talk about, or any plans you've got coming up here in the next few months?
Oh, racing, well, they do drag me out to the Berlin Raceway once a year, usually for the old timers night. I forget what they call it. So they get like John Benson, and several of them have died off. Ralph Baker. There's still a few of them that still show up for this historic night. I can't remember what they call it, but that's the only time I go there is once a year. And now my nephew has one of my old cars from '76, and it still runs. And he brings that out, and I make a lap with it for the crowd.
That's awesome. We're not dragging you out, Bob. We're showing off the young race fans what a real racer looked like, and making sure that everybody remembers all the great memories and all the great races that you had back in the day. And we can't thank you enough for coming on here and and spending a little time with us. We appreciate you, and best of luck to you, and we hope to talk to you down the road here soon, all right?
All right, thanks, Alec.
All right, that's Bob Senneker joining us here tonight, and Wow, from one goat to another.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Seems to be the show.
we're just getting started.
Yes.
So this is a jam-packed show. We've got our next guest getting ready to come up, and if you saw any picture throughout Mike Eddy's career, there was this little name, 4 letters, but it was prevalent on pretty much every race car that Mike Eddy ever drove. And we're going to be speaking with Chas Howe coming up here in just a moment, and we'll take a quick break, and we'll be back here on Let's Talk Short Track Racing here in just a bit.
Buying or selling a home? It's more than a transaction, it's a strategy. I'm Amy Lynn, and I bring clarity, confidence, and results to your real estate journey. Whether you're searching for the perfect place to call home or preparing to list your home for top dollar, I've got you covered. With smart marketing, strong negotiation, and a network you can trust, I don't just help clients close, I help them win. Let's make your next move the right one.
Hi, my name is Joe Constance with Joe's Racing Products. My company has been producing high-quality racing components in the USA for over 30 years. We know the commitment and determination it takes to win races because we race too. We're determined to produce quality products that can help you get to the finish line first. Ask your dealer for Joe's Racing Products or visit us online at joesracing.com.
And we are back on the Let's Talk Short Track Racing podcast. Jake and Erin here with you, and we are getting ready to bring on our next guest. And this is a guy who, when we're talking about the legacy of Mike Eddy, we mentioned it before the break. If you ever looked at one of Mike's race cars, on the side of that car, proudly displayed, were 4 letters, and it was a name that was synonymous with Mike Eddy and his success, and that, of course, would be Howe Chassis. And, of course, we're joined here today by Chas Howe coming on. Chas, we appreciate you taking some time to come on here and talk with us. I know we wish that we had better circumstances to be speaking about this, but we can't talk Mike Eddy without talking about the chassis that he drove and the legacy that your family left behind in terms of Mike's success. Quickly, just kind of take us back. I mean, Mike's got to be somebody that's just kind of been a fixture of basically of almost your entire life, I would think. Is that safe to say?
Well, I've certainly never known racing without Mike Eddy until now. Mike was almost exactly halfway between my father's age and mine, so he was kind of bridged between us. And he started working with my dad when I was young, and I got to work with him. Well, I still work with his son Matt every day. So yeah, we've had a long association with him.
kind of take us back to the kind of the earlier days. And we had Mark Martin on earlier. He talked about racing you guys' chassis early on in his career, but the loyalty that Mike showed throughout his career that spanned 3 decades. What does that mean for you and your family to have a driver like Mike that was just completely loyal to you guys and proud to drive your race cars?
Mike was one of the most honorable people I've ever met, and loyalty was big to him. He expected it in return, and we gave it to him, and he liked where his home was. He wasn't far away, so it wasn't just convenient that he had a lot of respect for my father, and my dad recognized the talent that he had early on, and he was committed to what he was doing, and and that was one thing my dad always respected more than anything, was somebody that was, that was dedicated and willing to put the work in. And Mike had the natural talent, but he also worked a lot harder at it than what people knew.
Yeah. And going back to the early stages of your remembrance of him and your father working with him, what are some of your first and favorite memories of being at the track? I'm sure you were there, kind of watching, learning, and watching his career.
Well, Mike was a high school dropout, and because he just wanted to work around cars all the time. His family had a salvage yard, and he would leave school to work on race cars. And when he couldn't get into the track when he was young, he'd sneak under the fence. And his dad had race cars, and different people drove them. Jimmy Roberts was one of the drivers, who was a Michigan Hall of Fame driver that drove for Guy Eddy, Mike's dad, before Mike got old enough. And then Mike and his brother Tim both tried driving, and Mike had the natural talent for it. And that's when I first remember seeing them racing against my dad and Tom Meyer and Bob Senneker, those guys, when Mike was just a young guy, and who is this guy? And they knew Guy because of his already racing, but he just continued to get better and better, and then he was not always in the best equipment, always got everything out of it. And then different opportunities came along. I think the first time he really drove from my dad was the Marty Robbins World 500 in 1977. And that was a race where my dad didn't like the high bank aggressive tracks as much. He could run them, but he didn't like them. But he thought this young, eager guy that he raced with would be more capable, and he could do him more good working on the car and being in the pits. And that was a field of, I think it was over 100 cars. Earnhardt didn't make the show.
Yeah.
And Mike won the race, and Larry Deachin was second. And that really kicked off a partnership that lasted a long time.
What about as you got older and you got some seat time and you got to get behind the wheel? Was Mike, somebody that you could call up, you could lean on, set up help, things like that? What was the relationship like between you guys as you got behind the wheel and you started to drive some?
Well, Mike was racing for a living then, and he was running the national tour. And at first, I worked occasionally with Mike on his crew, as gas man or jack man or guy carrying tires. And I would go with my dad to the track while my dad was on the radio with him and working that way. So I knew him through that. And then when I started racing, he was always supportive of it, but he had his own racing to do.
Yeah.
And then we would go out and test. And I never thought that I had anything on Mike for sure, because we would go and test, and we would each get in the car, and I never could run with Mike, and my dad would hold that over. Well, Mike can make that work. I don't know what your problem is, but I'm out there being tested against that time. I think he already was 4 or 5 time champion.
Yeah.
So it just set the bar really high that you knew you could always do more as a driver, and I would work hard to get the latest thing and all I could do to make my car lighter and better. And Mike would put his car together basically with hammer and nails and go out and outrun you. And he was fussy about the basics, and he wasn't fussy about the aesthetics. He did everything that mattered, and no more than he had to for appearance. And he was all business. I know he learned a lot from my dad. My dad was the same way. But he set the bar high, and if I asked him, he would tell me. And I remember one time I was running and I went over and asked him, and the car was pushing, and he said, well, load the sway bar. And I said, well, won't that make it push more? He said, then don't do it. And what he meant is, don't ask me if you're not going to listen. Oh, okay. So I went back and I said, well, load the sway bar. Mike said, load the sway. Sure enough, it turned. Went back. I said, you know, that worked? He said, yeah. I said, why did that work? He said, I don't know. It just does. So, yeah. But Mike was, people didn't give him enough credit for his ability to manage what was going on with the car in his head. I started spotting for him later in the 90s after I had raced a lot and had gotten a lot better. And so I would go to the track and I would spot for him. He didn't want much. He wanted information. He thought of a spotter just like the gauges. They gave him information. He did all the driving. He didn't want to be told when he was clear. He knew he was clear. He wanted you to shut up so he could drive. But when the caution came out, he would ask, what are my times? What are the times of the leaders? How many laps do I have on each side of the tires? And then how many laps are left? Okay, I'm coming in. And then he would tell the guys in the pits, if it was Howard or whoever it was, that he said, okay, I'm coming in, and I want you to swap the bleeders on the rights with set number 1 with set number 2, and then I'll be in for rights. And he had memorized usually 3 or 4 sets of tires in his head in advance and knew all the pressure settings. And he would make all those changes on the fly, and he knew how many laps it would take to get the front based on the lap time. So, and he was really a thinking racer. But he drove my car one time when I had started racing, and I was doing okay. And they had a race where it was a big pay race, and I asked him if he wanted to drive my car, my old car I was trying to sell. So he drove it for 30% of winnings, and he spun me out with my own car and won the race. So he had that same approach of my dad, is that if somebody let you win, you didn't win anything. You know, I've heard Gary St. Amant say that, because he told Gary that before. Yeah. But that was kind of their approach, is that and then when I spotted for him, every now and then you would have some other spotter that would come over and say, hey, could you talk to Mike and you know, and let us get by, or let us lead this lap, or they would ask for some favor. I say, I can ask him if you like, but I can already tell you what he's going to say. They would say, why don't you tell Mike if he backs off, we can both get by this guy. And I'd say, well, I know what Mike's going to say is, why don't you let him by and you can follow him? So he was all business, and he didn't give anything to anybody. If they beat him, they earned it.
And he was winning for over 3 decades. He was in the sport for a very long time. Kind of with how the sport grew, you guys had to also grow your chassis to grow with the sport. How did that look, and were there any struggles with that?
Well, the trend has always gone back and forth on who has the best car. And early on, when we had Mark Martin and Mike Eddy and Bob Senneker and all the good guy, and Dave Watson and some of the early heroes, and we were dominant. And then you slowly lost them. Mike or Mark left to be with Dylan, and Bob could win in whatever Bob was in, and Trickle came and gone. But you always had to have that one guy that you could tell customers that, well, Mike's winning with the car, and then they would believe in it. Port City, when they came along, they had Butch Miller, and you always had to have one guy that could prove the car could do it if the driver was up to it. And, and Mike was our guy. We were really fortunate to have him as the trends changed. And when we got behind, we worked hard to try to not let him down and always give him competitive cars.
Well, we appreciate you coming on here and taking a little time to talk with us again. For any kind of young race fan that doesn't know who Mike Eddy is, he's definitely the type of driver where I wish more younger drivers would seek out information and try to learn a little bit about the history of the sport. If you're talking to a young driver, what's the one thing that you would want to take from Mike's approach throughout the years, that you could, kind of a lesson that you could talk to a young driver, if you want to be like Mike, this is what you need to do?
He was completely committed. He didn't have anything else he wanted to do. He wanted to win every race, as much as the first race as the last. And I think one of the best pieces of advice he would give is, when people would say, Mike, what's your favorite track? He'd say, whichever track I'm at.
Good.
And it's because nobody was ever any good on a track they said they hated. And if he struggled with the track, he learned it, he stayed committed to it, and he usually overcame it. But although he never was intimidated by the big fast tracks like Winchester and won there, the tracks that took a lot of nuance, his best talent was with his right foot. That he didn't give the car more gas than what it wanted. In one race, when I hear him, who am I to give him advice? He came to race one of our cars at Owasso Speedway, and I said, now everybody's running the top line. This is more of a momentum track. Down on the bottom, there's a bump off the corner. They tend to break loose, so you probably want to stay high. And we had to run this qualifying race again. And he said, okay. And Mike always chewed on a stick of Wrigley's gum. He didn't want no sugar gum because he said it'd turn to dust in 50 laps. So he'd chomp on that gum, and he dropped to the bottom and passed the whole field and won the race. And I said, well, I don't know how you made it stick on the bottom. He said, I just didn't push the gas. He said, those other guys are spinning the tires because they're trying to give it more than they'll take. And he never gave the car more gas than it would take. That's part of why he was so good at Berlin.
That's awesome. Well, Chas, we appreciate you taking some time to come on and chat with us about Mike Eddy and his life and his career and the impact that he made. Not only in just ASA but in racing in general. And thanks a lot for your time tonight. And hopefully we'll get to chat with you down the road here, and we'll talk a little bit more racing one of these days here on Let's Talk Short Track Racing. We appreciate you coming on, buddy.
Okay, well, thank you.
Awesome. We're going to step aside, take another break. And on the other side, we've just got legends and legends and legends of the ASA series coming up next. Two-time ASA champion Gary St. Amant joins us next on Let's Talk Short Track Racing.
Buying or selling a home? It's more than a transaction. It's a strategy. I'm Amy Lynn, and I bring clarity, confidence, and results to your real estate journey. Whether you're searching for the perfect place to call home or preparing to list your home for top dollar, I've got you covered. With smart marketing, strong negotiation, and a network you can trust, I don't just help clients close, I help them win. Let's make your next move the right one.
Hi, my name is Joe Constance with Joe's Racing Products. My company has been producing high-quality racing components in the USA for over 30 years. We know the commitment and determination it takes to win races because we race too. We're determined to produce quality products that can help you get to the finish line first. Ask your dealer for Joe's Racing Products or visit us online at joesracing.com.
And we're back on Let's Talk Short Track Racing. We have got another legend of the ASA series, former two-time champion of the series, Gary St. Amant, joining us. Gary, thank you so much for taking some time. We appreciate you coming on here tonight. And Again, we wish we were speaking under some better circumstances, but we've got to talk about the life, the legacy, and the incredible career of Mike Eddy, who was a fixture in the ASA series for the better part of 3 decades, and a guy that you had a lot of really good battles with on the racetrack.
Yes, sir. It was definitely a huge shock to me when I heard that Mike had passed, and it hurt me deeply. I just it took me back to when I was a kid. I sat in the stands with his wife Patsy, and watched him race along with my dad's car, Don Gregory, and then on down the road, there I am racing against him, and we lost one of the greatest teachers in our sport. Between Ed Howe and Mike Eddy, they taught so many people what we love to do, this racing stuff. They taught us all how to do it a lot better way. So it was a huge loss losing Mike Eddy.
Yeah, it was tough news that like you said when you saw that news bulletin kind of come up. But you mentioned seeing him sitting in the grandstands when you're a kid and watching him. What was it like when you get older and you're sitting behind the wheel and you're like, I can't believe I'm out here. I can't believe I'm racing with these guys. And then the longevity of the career that Mike had. Just kind of talked about what it was like for you those early years and getting to compete with him and kind of getting your career started.
Well, it's funny, like I started out as a back marker, getting lapped, every 100 laps, and and those guys taught me how to race like that. Like you get out of the way, and it's respect, and then you get the respect back. And so once I finally got up to speed and I could race with them, it was. You have no idea how much of a thrill it was for me racing against Bob Senneker and Mike Eddy and Dick Trickle, and then the list goes on. Because those to me, those were my heroes growing up, and the guys that I wanted to be like. And so Mike was actually one that I went to and leaned on for a lot of things, and for whatever reason, I know why, because he knew my family pretty well. And he knew that I was a fan of his, early on, and before I even started racing. So he kind of helped me out in a lot of ways. And I have this one great story. I have a lot of great Mike Eddy stories, but one that just come into my mind. Just talking about what was it like racing against him. And we were in Indianapolis at an ASA banquet. He'd won, I believe, his 5th or 6th championship at that time. And I was starting to get up to speed, and I wanted to know what it took to win an ASA championship. So me and Mike and Patsy was in his room, hotel room in Indianapolis. And I'd say they had quite a bit to drink that night celebrating their championship. And I let that question come out. I looked at Mike and I said, hey, Mike, what's it take to win an ASA championship? And he looked me square in the eyes, and with a wild man look, he says, you got to want it more than me. And, like that right there resonated inside of me. And it told me what I had to do. Like I know that, we knew that Mike Eddy was the one that won the most championships. So if I wanted to win a championship, I was going to have to be awful tough, just like Mike Eddy. And we finally got that. And Mike, he never changed any towards me at all. He was still a friend. We had a couple racing bouts where, he got into me at Madison. We were running for a championship, and I got mad, and I did something I never should have done because I made myself look like a fool running across the infield at Madison, Wisconsin. And I went up and I got in his face. And first of all, I wasn't in that great a shape. So running all the way from turn 3 to the start finish line at Madison was about killed me doing that. So then I got up to Mike, and I started yelling at him, which I could barely talk because I was out of breath. And I remember he looked at me and really didn't say anything. But if I could take something back in my life, that's one of the things I'd take back, because I overreacted to something that, if I would have waited and watched it on video, it wasn't near as much Mike as it was just he got into me and kind of hooked me. And drug me into a spin. It was kind of both of us, and so, we went on past that, and, I still talk to Mike, every time I'd see him. And, so I just been doing a lot of thinking about, all the times that I spent with Mike and, all the things that he taught me and not just me, just all the people that he raced against. He taught them something. And truly amazing, the life that Mike Eddy had.
What's one of the biggest lessons you think you learned from him on the track? You've kind of mentioned off the track your biggest lesson that he taught.
Well, what you just said, okay, but this was another one that it started off the track, but it ended up on the track. Mm-hmm. And we were at Berlin for an ASA race, and he wasn't racing for points on this particular year. And we were starting on the front row. He had fast time. He was on the inside, and I was on the outside. Well, my team got me to go over and ask Mike if he would let us lead the first lap, which I knew that it probably wasn't a good question to ask Mike Eddy. I mean, there's a lot of guys that you would do that with, and you wouldn't think twice about it. But Mike Eddy wasn't that guy. So they talked me into it, and I walked over to him, and I couldn't even look him in the eyes. I said, "Hey, Mike, hey, what do you think? Hey, you got me lead the first lap. I'll let you go." And I looked him in the eyes at that time, and he looked at me, and he started shaking his head, and he's like, "Gary, Gary, Gary." And I was like, "Oh, God, I knew I should have never asked him this question." And he says, "Gary, haven't you learned in life, if somebody gives you something, you don't appreciate it near as much as if you earn it."
Yeah. Wow.
And I stood there, and that sunk in like you have no idea how much that sunk in. And that particular day, it was about racing. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest, I have lived my life like that from that point on. Yeah. Yeah. It's about earning your way, through racing and earning your way through life, really. Mm-hmm. And so that particular night, I don't know if he let me lead the first lap, but I can tell you this. I put all that Mike Eddy stuff together, including the one that said you got to want it more than me. And I started on the outside, and I beat him back around for the first lap.
Nice.
Wow.
And I don't know what happened after that night, but I know I led that first lap.
Gary, I got to ask you, we've a theme that we've had tonight. We had Bob on earlier. We talked with Mark Martin earlier. The success and the number of drivers that raced back in the 70s and then eventually into the 80s led into just this period during the early to mid 90s and into the late 90s and early 2000s where the ASA, it was in everybody's television across the country where you guys had this big TV deal. How much of an impact and how important was it to have a driver like Mike, guys like Bob Senneker, and then going back into the 80s, you had guys like Trickle and, of course, Kulwicki and Rusty and all those guys that kind of paved the way for guys like you that, I grew up watching in the 90s to really get into the living rooms of everyone in America and show everybody this amazing racing series. How important was Mike's impact early on, which then led to the later successes of the ASA series?
Oh, it was huge. I just got done telling a story today about Mike Eddy and the way he was. He wanted to handle everything on his race car. He was a worker. He did his own tires right before the race. He never stopped. He wanted it more than everybody else. And when we got on TV and live TV, Mike Eddy's racing changed right there at that point because all of a sudden he couldn't be doing his tires right before the race. Yeah. He was doing interviews, and he had GM Goodwrench as a sponsor, so he had to make sure that he was doing a good job for them. So his racing changed right there at that point. And I think the ones that knew Mike the way he was and the way he turned out, it kind of showed us the way that we needed to be. Like maybe, we all loved to be hands-on the race cars back then, but there was also a point where if you had a good team, you could let them do all the work. And that was believe it or not, that was a huge change for really all of us, that ran around in circles back in the day.
Yeah.
Was like letting other people work on our cars because we were so much into them.
Yeah.
So, there's no doubt about, like Mike, that I think that's a huge thing that's a little bit wrong with asphalt short track racing today.
Yeah.
Is those veterans, those Mike Eddys and Bob Sennekers and Dick Trickles that were around to teach me and, some of the even the little bit younger guys, there's not near as many of those guys around to be able to teach our young guys today. And I think it shows on the racetrack. It shows in the pit area. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can remember tuning into races and watching you guys on TV, and you talked about how things had changed. The imagery of the series and big time sponsors coming in, and you guys having, with some of you guys, I mean, you guys had iconic looks to your race cars, and it was just, you could tune in to an ASA race and you knew that was Mike Eddy, you knew that was Bob Senneker, you knew that was Gary St. Amant. How big was that for your racing program? For guys like Mike and Bob that kind of paved the way to lead to those moments there and the success that you were able to have later, and look at, I mean, we talked about the guys that raced early on in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but they're kind of towards the tail end of the ASA days. I mean, there were some pretty big names there that were racing against you when you were winning your championships as well, which paved the way for them to then go to NASCAR as well.
Yep. I was very fortunate. I've been around racetracks my whole life, and I was lucky enough that my dad was he built race cars, mechanic crew chief for Don Gregory, and so watching Don Gregory race, from when I was a kid until I started racing, that was also a huge benefit for me, because Don raced right with Mike and Bob, and he won the Winchester 400 and beat them all there that day. And, so, it definitely meant a lot to have those guys that a lot of those guys, the guys up in Wisconsin, they were racing, 5 and 6 nights a week, so all that experience, like, if you really wanted to race, you got around those guys and you tried to rub up against them. So hopefully some of their stuff would rub off onto you. And, it was definitely huge, being able to learn from those guys. And, you brought up, racing against Mike Eddy and Bob Senneker. That put goosebumps on my arms, just because it takes me back to that. And those were definitely the best times of my life, was the ASA days when it was in its glory. And, I was very lucky enough to have been there, when actually the money was at its best. And, the racing to me, I still go back to those times I sat in the stands in the, 70s, 80s, before I started racing. And I still look at those guys that raced then and think, those guys were way better than I was, and it's kind of funny how, you think you're trying to stack up against somebody. And I felt like I never ever stacked up to Mike Eddy or Bob Senneker. But, at the end of the day, they get a little bit older and then they start stepping away, and then all of a sudden you're kind of what they were at one time, and then you think back, and they definitely had a huge impact on the success that I had and the success that a lot of ASA champions had over the years.
Yeah, Gary, you were definitely torchbearer for the series there. When a lot of guys started to their careers started to taper off, and give yourself some credit, man. I remember when I was a young kid, I remember the first time ASA came to my local track. My home track was it's the Freedom Factory was DeSoto, and I was pretty fired up that the same guy that I would watch on my TV, I was getting to watch at my local short track. I didn't think you guys would venture down to Florida very much, but to roll into the grandstands and see your car, pull out onto the track, it was awesome for a young kid to see. And I think if I remember correctly, that day there was some guy on the outside front row named Johnson. I don't know if he would amount to anything or not. People forget that Jimmy got his start in ASA as well.
Yep. And then, Jimmy was a teammate of mine when he first started. Yep. So, I was very lucky at that time to, have some help from General Motors, and they come to us and, wanted wanted us to help Jimmy with his driving career in stock cars. So we started that out, and I still remember the day that I kind of stopped helping Jimmy was the day that he wanted me to spot for him. Even after he went on to a different team,
Yeah.
I would spot like in qualifying. I'd talk to him, and we were at Anderson for the Red Bud one year, and I was sitting on the pole, and I got on the radio, and I'm telling him what to do, and he knocked me off the pole, and that was the last time I ever did that for him.
Yeah, that's where I go back again, and guys like yourself that go and have a successful ASA career, but then a guy like Jimmy who then, people don't know that you're racing against a guy that's going to be a 7-time champion in the Cup Series.
That's right.
Kyle Busch gets, he's a young teenager getting an opportunity to run some ASA races. Go back into 2001, the year that Johnny Sauter and their team put together. All of this is possible because of a guy like Mike and
That's right.
keeping
That's right.
things going and keeping the series alive and being kind of that I don't know if you want to kind of call it necessarily I don't know if elder statesman is the right word or the right phrase, but that's more or less what he was, to where it was like,
Sure.
you know what, if you're going to do things here in this series, we're going to do it a certain way, and I'm going to remind you of that if you're not doing it the right way, and that's kind of the vibe that I've gotten from some of our conversations with several other drivers here tonight. And what's the thing that stands out the most to you, as we'll get ready to start wrapping things up here in a little bit. For you, what is Mike Eddy's legacy going to be? And if there's a young racer or a young race fan that comes to you and is like, who was Mike Eddy? Define him, define Mike Eddy in your perspective.
To me, he was the one that wanted it more than anybody else. It's just like he told me that day, when he looked me in the eyes and said, "You got to want it more than me," and that's who he was. Yeah. He wanted it. He's so bad, that he would do pretty much whatever it took to win. Yeah. And him and Bob Senneker, when I sat up in the stands as a kid, I would watch them race, and they were two of my favorites. Along with my dad's car, Don Gregory, and. Yeah. I'd see Mike, take Bob out, and Bob would get into him a little bit, and Mike wreck him a little harder, and like for myself, I looked at those two and thought, I want to be a mix of both of them. Yeah. I want to have a little Mike in me, and I want to have a little Bob in me, and that's what I'd like to do. So, those guys there, they were a huge impact. On like I said, not just me, but a lot of drivers, that come through ASA. Not just ASA, that went on to even Cup.
Yeah.
So you brought up that Bradenton race, and it kind of made me want to spit a little bit.
I'm sorry.
Because
I know how that went that day. I'm sorry.
You know what happened. You talked to Hansen earlier, didn't you?
Yeah. No, not yet. Not yet. We'll get there. We'll get there.
All right. I kid Hansen because I screwed up bad. I think I dominated the race that day, and on the last lap, Hansen was right on my bumper, and I was going down the backstretch, and I looked in my mirror one too many times, and I missed the corner, and he passed me on the last corner to win.
Yeah. And it
made me. Is that what you remember?
I'm gonna let you tell the story. It's better coming from you.
Yeah.
And I
that's
think,
what it was.
And I think that was the day where I think I got a little thought in my head. You know what? If we put an asphalt repair crew at a racetrack, maybe we could make some money out of this.
Oh, yeah.
I remember that was quite the afternoon, if I remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Gary, just before we let you go here in a little bit, again, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us. Just kind of, you got a lot of fans that are still wanting to know, what's Gary up to these days? What you got going on? Are we going to see you maybe popping into a racetrack here or there? What you got going on?
Yeah, I'm at the racetrack right now as we speak.
Good.
And I work on race cars every day.
Good.
And every weekend, when I have a good weekend, I'm at the racetrack. So, I can't get away from it. The driving career, I never said I retired.
Yeah.
But I really enjoy working on the cars and working with young guys to try and make them better. So, I'm going to have to lose about 20 pounds to be able to get in the seat. But I love it. I love what I do. And like I said, I can't wait to get to the next racetrack.
Nice. Well, we got a nice race coming up down at Bradenton at the end of November, around Thanksgiving weekend. That's going to pay pretty good. I know there's going to be some drivers from up in your neck of the woods that are going to be venturing down. It'd be awesome to see. And you know what? I believe it or not, if I remember correctly, last year I think Scott Hansen was there. So if you and Scott need to have some words, you might be able to find him there.
Yeah. I don't think I wasn't there this past year, but the year before I was there with Anthony Sergi.
Yes, awesome.
And I hope we can put a deal back together to come back down there again, awesome. Because I really enjoyed working with Anthony, and he has a super nice race car, and I love going to Bradenton. I love it.
Yeah, not one of the worst places in the world to have to visit.
That's right.
Yeah.
Especially like anywhere from, November to, February.
Yeah,
it's cold up here.
We had some Midwest folks that were pretty excited to come down and be in some shorts and looking at all us crazy ass Floridians in hoodies and jeans when it's like 68 degrees. So. All right, yeah. So Gary, again, thank you so much, man. This was awesome getting to catch up with you and talk a little bit about Mike. Any last thing you want to say? Anything either to the family or anything like that? Because I know a lot of Mike's fans are tuning in with us here tonight.
Yeah, just prayers. I mean, that's a tough loss. With a man like Mike Eddy that taught so many people about. I always said, it might have been about racing on that day, but, everything he taught you, it really pertained to life. And he was just that kind of guy. He didn't have no frills. It was all pretty simple for Mike Eddy. And what he said, he meant. And, he was a pretty straightforward guy. And I think that, I don't know that there was anyone in the pits that looked at Mike Eddy with more respect than what I did. Because I saw him when I was young, got to race with him, and definitely a huge loss losing Mike Eddy. So,
well, Gary, thank you so much for calling in with us here tonight. We'll look forward to maybe we'll catch up with you a little bit down the road here. We'll talk a little more short track racing with you in the future. Thank you so much again.
Yep, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right, not a problem. That's Gary St. Amant, former two-time champion of the ASA Series, chatting with us a little bit here tonight about the life, the legacy, and the career of Mike Eddy. But we're not done yet. Got another break coming up, and on the other side, we've got a driver that you heard Gary mention here in this last segment. We're going to have Scott Hansen coming on to talk with us here about Mike Eddy. One more back here in just a little bit here on Let's Talk Short Track Racing.
Hi, my name is Joe Constance with Joe's Racing Products. My company has been producing high-quality racing components in the USA for over 30 years. We know the commitment and determination it takes to win races because we race too. We're determined to produce quality products that can help you get to the finish line first. Ask your dealer for Joe's Racing Products or visit us online at joesracing.com.
Buying or selling a home? It's more than a transaction. It's a strategy. I'm Amy Lynn, and I bring clarity, confidence, and results to your real estate journey. Whether you're searching for the perfect place to call home or preparing to list your home for top dollar, I've got you covered. With smart marketing, strong negotiation, and a network you can trust, I don't just help clients close, I help them win. Let's make your next move the right one.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Short Track Racing. We are now on the phone with Scott Hansen. Scott was a long time a competitor in the ASA series. He had several battles up front with Mike Eddy.
Yeah, Scott, we appreciate you taking some time to come on here and chat with us. Top 5 in the all-time win list in the ASA series, and it's pretty safe to say you and Mike spent a lot of years and a lot of races side by side with each other and battling for a lot of wins. Kind of, we're obviously we're sad to hear, that Mike had passed away, and we wish we were here, talking under better circumstances. But I think the easiest way to kind of get this thing started is just kind of go back to earlier in your career. And what are some of your early memories and some of the first times you remember being around the track and being around Mike and getting to compete against him?
Well, the very first time I ran against Mike was at the Milwaukee Mile, and I was not running ASA full time.
Mm-hmm.
I had a guy from Green Bay who had a car that thought we should go down and give it a try, and it was getting close to the end. Now, you got to remember Mike and Trickle and Butch Miller and Mike Miller. These guys raced ASA for 15 years minimum before I started. I started late, but getting back to it, Mike didn't know me. I didn't know Mike. I didn't know who the hot dog. I mean, I knew who the hot dogs were, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
You had Eddy, Senneker, Wallace, Kowicki, Trickle. I mean, you knew who they were.
Yeah.
And we got down to about 5 laps to go in the race, and I think Mike was running third and I was running fourth, and Mike was being Mike. Very hard to pass, not doing anything really wrong, but me not doing any better. I thought, wow, what would a podium finish be like in my first race down here? And I sailed it into turn 3 and moved him up the racetrack, and I run third and he run fourth, and he came over to me later, and if you knew Mike, he had a stare that could just melt you right there. I mean, he'd look at you, and you couldn't help but look at him when he was telling you something. Mm-hmm. And his exact words is, don't know who you are. If you plan on being around here a while, I think things are probably going to have to change.
Oh, boy.
And, yeah. And I'm like, yes, sir. And that was my introduction to Mike Eddy.
Yeah, little early education there from the polar bear, right?
Oh, my goodness. He was, if you got to know Mike, which I did, I got to know him very, very well. He was a teddy bear, not a polar bear.
Yeah, we've gathered that up here from some conversations we've had here tonight. But kind of talk about, you had mentioned it. You kind of got, like you said, a little late to the game where, Mike is competing, still winning championships. Him and Bob are going, neck and neck, and then here you come into the mix. Where did you kind of think you fit into that kind of dichotomy of ASA kind of in the late 80s and then into the early 90s as you saw the series really start to grow? We mentioned it earlier with Gary gaining a much larger television audience. And how impactful do you think a guy like Mike, the career that he had, led to that success, which then put ASA in the living rooms of people, all across America?
If you have ever watched an ASA race from back in the day, I can't tell you how many people today yet say we don't know how great we had it in racing back then. Mm-hmm. We don't know. There is no comparison. And I'm not speaking from me. I'm speaking from the fans that have approached me and told me and said, man, you guys did it. You guys put on just a remarkably good show. And I never kind of looked at it that way. When I was fortunate enough to get hired by Baker Motorsports, I didn't have a clue what I was in for. I never ran I never ran a race over 100 laps long. So when they hired me and we went into it, and the very first race, I gave it away. I was leading it with 3 laps to go and a caution and driver error. I gave it away and run second and came back the next week and won at the Milwaukee Mile. I instantly told myself, it's not this easy.
Yeah.
It's not this easy.
Yeah.
And boy, did they all prove it to me too.
And so, as you were mentioning, that there's no comparison to what the driving was like back then to what it is now. What do you think attributes to that big of a change? Do you think it's driving style, or do you think it's more the cars and the equipment?
Camaraderie.
Seems to be
Kids
a
are too
common.
young to have a beer. Kids are too young to have a beer today.
Yeah, that's
When-
true.
When we raced our guts out, good, bad, or otherwise. We got out of the race cars. We loaded up our stuff, and half to 3/4 of the people. I take that back. We practiced, we qualified, we got ready. Half to 3/4 of the people, we didn't leave each other. We stayed together. We talked. We just got to know each other. We worked on our own stuff. We knew what the equipment was about. You look at the racing today, it's a model car that's put together by, a handful of people. The drivers do not have one clue what it took to put that car together. They don't really know the struggles and trials and tribulations that their counterparts went through to get there and do things. So to me, it's about the camaraderie of the sport that made us who and what we were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely kind of a lost art and something that we don't necessarily see a whole lot of. But let's go back to some memorable moments with you and Mike. There were some times in the early to mid 90s where you two found each other certainly up at the front of the field competing for some checker flags and battling it out, for championships there in the early 90s there. Is there one particular race where you can remember going toe-to-toe with Mike and it coming down to the end and coming down to the wire at the end of the race, and what it took to try to beat Mike and a driver that had so much experience at a lot of the tracks that you guys would race there in the ASA? What would it take? What did it take from you to be able to try to hold off Mike at the end of some of those races?
Well, I can remember one distinctly. IRP, probably mid 90s, early 90s. Mike was leading. I was running second, kind of like the Milwaukee, the initial deal. And he wasn't doing anything wrong, but he just wasn't giving me the room I needed. And a little slip by him allowed me to get to the inside of him. And I am telling you, we raced 25, 30, 35 laps, wheel to wheel, side by side. Could have put a piece of paper between us. We never touched. And I got thinking to myself, I'm not the guy to beat this tough guy. I mean, if somebody's going to win, it's going to be him. And I went into turn one and again, slipped a little, slid up a little, whatever my story was later, and got ahead of him, just barely got ahead of him. And all I can remember my spotter saying is, don't let him catch you. Because, oh yeah, and I drove the last 30, 40 laps as they were qualifying laps. I won and he runs second. And we were standing on the podium and he looked at me again and said, I've got a pretty good memory and I don't forget a whole lot. And what do you say? What do you do, right? grin and yes, sir. And but flip side of that, we're racing Milwaukee, and I had a valve cover leaking, and the oil was burning real bad in the car, and I was getting sick. And I saw that Mike was out of the race. Now you're right. We're racing for championship points together.
Yep.
And I sent one of my guys over to see if he would drive my car. And within minutes, they were there saying, he's here. He's all ready. We pitted, switched drivers, got the valve cover fixed. I don't know. He probably came out 12th, 15th, whatever, and drove the car up to a third place finish, which just phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something you don't see very much at all anymore, and that's an awesome story to hear there. Another thing wanted to talk a little bit about is your success and the career that you had in ASA led you to some opportunities to move up into the NASCAR ranks a little bit and kind of dip your toes into that water a little bit, but Mike was a guy that never really took the opportunity where it kind of came out through the years that Mike had some opportunities, but he turned them down, and he stayed in ASA. What do you think it meant for the series and for him to be loyal like that, and what can you talk about with your experiences of what it was like to compete in ASA for all those years and then move up to the NASCAR ranks and then have the perspective and then be able to come back and compete again in ASA kind of in the later years of your career?
Well, Mike, again, whether you believe it, don't believe it, how you knew him, how you didn't, Mike wanted to give back to the fans, to the short track fans. Mike, Senneker, I can't even tell you, Gary probably.
Yeah.
There were just quite a few guys that just loved Mike Miller, just loved to compete against friends.
Yeah.
No, we didn't worry about politics. We didn't worry about sponsors. We didn't worry about any of that. You know, it was like a Saturday night race to us. You know, we would go there. Yeah, we raced hard, but we didn't want to be told. And from personal experience, Mike Eddy, I don't believe, and this is only my opinion, would have made it in the NASCAR ranking because I didn't know enough to keep my big mouth shut. When you go there, you're playing in their sandbox.
Yeah.
And when you start giving opinions and making comments, they tell you.
Yeah.
Do you want to keep doing this? And yeah, that was my one full year of that, and I was pretty happy to walk away.
Yeah.
And so we know Mike was a big teacher in the sport. What are some of the things that you think he taught you either on or off the racetrack that you've carried with you throughout the rest of your career?
Creature comforts comes to mind because when I first started, I think we were at Columbus, Gary St. Amant's home track.
Yeah.
And I ran about half the race and my neck literally felt broke. My head was falling off my shoulders. I didn't have in the car the right equipment to be comfortable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike was one of those guys. I believe he told me Oswego, New York, I want to think it was. He told me, he says, there is no more grueling of a racetrack than there. He says, you better, and he came up all on his own. He came and he said, you better get that seat, the steering wheel, the pedals. You better make that cockpit of that car so comfortable.
Yeah.
Because this is what it's all about.
Yeah.
And I took him wholeheartedly and made change after change. And if it weren't for him, again, just coming out of nowhere and saying, because I think he knew I was going to be around for a while.
Yeah.
And I think he knew that, like Trickle and all those guys, they would rather beat you on the racetrack by passing you or whatever cleanly and not having you out of control and wrecking and possibly taking them with you. So, I think those guys just, like you said, they enjoyed telling us that did not have a clue. Now, it was up to us whether we listened or not.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, in my opinion, knew too much. They didn't need anybody telling them how to do it. And I listened. I want to give myself an A+ for listening, and I think that's what vaulted my career to run with those guys.
That's awesome. And you had a great career. I mean, I've been talking throughout the night. I was a kid of the 90s, but I grew up with the ASA series in my living room every weekend, and I loved watching you guys race just as much as I loved watching the Cup guys and the Busch Series guys, and the there's a young generation of racers that don't have a clue that there was so much great racing going on. And it was so awesome to get to see you guys take the ASA series to a higher and higher level. But before we wrap things up, we got to ask, what are you doing? What you've got going on? I remember, I think I saw you walking around the pits. My home track is Bradenton at the Freedom Factory, and if I recall, I think I was either last year or the year before, I saw you walking around the pits at the Freedom Factory last year. What's Scott Hansen doing these days, and where can fans see what you're up to, and what are you got going on?
Well, I was at Bradenton the last 2 years, and
Yep.
we're going again this year.
Awesome.
When I quit racing, I started a trucking company and was able to sell that and retire. But that only lasted just so long. And a great friend of mine, car owner of mine, Kenny Schrader, called up. And he does the Federated Auto Parts ride-alongs.
Yep.
Him and Federated been together for 25 or 7 years.
Yeah.
The longest going. So I actually leave Monday for the third trip of the year. We're starting out in Elko, Minnesota, and we're working our way all the way across to Seattle, Washington, with this ride and drive program. We do 5 a year, I believe. And then when I'm sitting home wondering what to do, I've got a really good friend that's got a trucking company here that I jump in and drive a dump truck during the week. But I'm retired for the most part, and if you call up and say, hey, there's a party in Bradenton tomorrow, odds are I'm going to be there.
Awesome. Well, there's going to be a big one at the end of November, come Thanksgiving weekend, and it'd be awesome to see you down there. And we had Gary on earlier. Do we want to talk about Bradenton 1998, or do we not want to bring that up? I think you'd like to bring it up a little bit more than he does.
I know who won the race.
Yeah, we established that.
I never looked at, and you bring up the TV, TNN, and everybody that was back in the day. They did an absolute phenomenal job.
They did. Yep.
Covering us. I just can't tell you how much notoriety we all got as short track racers. But I never did watch the end of that race. In my opinion, I do not think I touched Gary. But hopefully there's not full coverage to show it. But I know he was a little crabby, cranky, but he got over. Gary is a fabulous guy. Yeah. One of the best racers out there. So Gary and I had 2 or 3 encounters along the way, but you know what? In the end, we grabbed a Bud Light and we all enjoyed why we were there.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming on and talking a little bit about your career and shedding some light on the great person and the great racer that Mike Eddy was. And we appreciate your time, and best of luck with you going forward here. We look to hope some fans will get to see you there with those driving experiences with Kenny Schrader. And who knows? Maybe we'll have a cold one for you waiting here in Bradenton come in Thanksgiving.
I'm not going to turn you down, and my condolences go out to
Yes.
the whole Eddy family and relation there. I saw Mike a couple of years ago at the ASA 50th.
Yeah.
And just loved every minute that we had together. So this was a shock to me as well as all of us.
Well, Scott, thank you so much again. Look forward to checking in with you here down the road. Maybe we'll talk a little short track racing in the future here with you again. And thanks again for taking some time with us tonight.
Absolutely, anytime.
Awesome. Thank you. That's legendary ASA driver Scott Hansen. And, man, great conversation with Scott, great conversation with all these drivers. We can step aside here. We can take one more break. And, Erin, when we come back, let's kind of recap everything. What a night.
Yeah.
I mean, we got a lot to uncover here. So
Yes.
We'll take a quick break on Let's Talk Short Track Racing. We appreciate everybody that's watching live. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe if you're watching on the YouTube channel. Share the post. Try to get the word out here because we were talking to some absolute legends here tonight. Yes. And we'll wrap things up. We got one more break, and we'll come up and come back and wrap up the show here in just a moment here on Let's Talk Short Track Racing.
Buying or selling a home? It's more than a transaction. It's a strategy. I'm Amy Lynn, and I bring clarity, confidence, and results to your real estate journey. Whether you're searching for the perfect place to call home or preparing to list your home for top dollar, I've got you covered. With smart marketing, strong negotiation, and a network you can trust, I don't just help clients close, I help them win. Let's make your next move the right one.
Hi, my name is Joe Constance with Joe's Racing Products. My company has been producing high-quality racing components in the USA for over 30 years. We know the commitment and determination it takes to win races because we race too. We're determined to produce quality products that can help you get to the finish line first. Ask your dealer for Joe's Racing Products or visit us online at joesracing.com.
Welcome back to the Let's Talk Short. Wow, words. What a night.
We've been talking a lot tonight. Sorry.
Let's Talk Short Track Racing podcast. Yeah, what a night we have had. We've had some total legends on tonight's show.
I'm going to need a time machine, and I'm going to go back and talk to 8-year-old Jake and just let him know life is going to be fine because there's going to come a night where you're literally going to get to talk to some of your absolute favorite drivers from when you were a kid. What a night. Incredible. It's incredible to speak to these guys. Unfortunate circumstances, but the one thing I take away from this entire night is, again, the reassurance that racing, we are a family.
Yeah.
And it's community. And you heard Scott mention it, and you heard Gary and the guys talk about it, how fiercely they competed on the racetrack. When it was all said and done, we were willing to help each other. And, we might have raced each other a little hard there on the racetrack, but when it's all said and done, everything can be fixed over an ice cold beer. And I loved hearing that.
Something that was also a common theme, but I think was that the competition, they don't have as much respect for each other nowadays, but I think it also comes back to, once you're off the track too, something that stayed the same is that we are all like a family, like you said. The whole race track and everything, if someone's in need or there's circumstances like this, everyone comes around and supports each other and their families.
Society in general will shift and change, but you still can practice these same things, and I know we get to see it still at racetracks. Like, don't get us wrong, it's not like that everywhere, and there's certain events in certain communities that are still tight like that. But for Mike, we're thinking about his family. I know for several years, his son Travis would come down and he would run World Series week at New Smyrna in the modified. And all the guys down here in Florida thought that they had a badass modified. Well, when Travis Eddy came rolling in the pits, you thought differently. And Travis carried on, their family's legacy, and just would come down here every February, and straight up he'd just whoop up on our boys for several years. And we're thinking of Travis, we're thinking of Mike's wife, and just everybody, because it's not just his family. They're friends of his, and they're fans of his. I know that are they're hurting. Mm-hmm. It's been a tough week, and I hope tonight and this show and this particular episode is something that, for years people can look back on and reflect on some great memories and some great times. And again,
some great lessons that he's taught. That was really interesting.
Yes. Young racers, watch this. Listen to these stories. Do the research yourself. The results are there, but communicate. Talk to people. Tell stories. Ask the right questions. You heard some of the guys say that was the biggest thing for them is being able to ask the right question. And if racing is going to continue, you need characters and you need personality. Mike Eddy had that, but he also had the ability to want to help his fellow racer. And if we're going to continue this on, we're going to need more Mike Eddys in the world. And unfortunately, as we continue to go on, we're losing guys like Mike, and there's going to be a big hole that's going to need to be filled.
Yeah, that is for sure.
Well, I had a blast.
Yeah.
I don't get to do this very often. I used to do this whole podcast thing, and then I decided I'm just going to be a race announcer now, but I like getting the chance to do this. Frank's going to be back next week. Yes. They had a great week up at Berlin. They're going to be back here again next week. Frank, I promise I'll refill the beer fridge. I promise. I didn't take that much. We'll take care of that, but I appreciate you guys let me come on this week.
We appreciate you coming in and filling in. Thank you for not making me do it by myself.
No, I got you.
I appreciate it.
I'm good at talking.
Yes.
Put a microphone in front of my face. I think I can make it work.
You did great.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. So what do you guys got coming up next week?
Next week we will have Let's Talk Tech Talk back.
Yep.
So that'll be exciting.
I'm not very good at that. I don't. I'm as mechanical as a rock, so you wouldn't want me to do that. I'll just talk about the stuff.
Me either. I will let Frank and Nate take that back over, but they will be. I'm not sure what they will be covering next week, but they always come in with some great ideas. Or if you guys have any ideas, leave them in the comments below. And yeah, we are going to have a guest on. I'm not exactly sure who we'll have, but we will be announcing that shortly.
Alex is going to have a lot of work this week if he's going to try to live up to the expectations he set this week with the legends that we had on our show today.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one to beat.
Yeah, certainly. But get out, go to your local short track. Everybody's racing. It's not frozen up north. Well, it's still cold by Florida standards for some places, but
I'd gladly take it at this point.
Yes, trust me. With Alec and I, we know. We appreciate everybody tuning in. Support your local track. We got some local events going on here where we are, but racing all around the country as schedules are really starting to ramp up. There's A lot of great races coming up, and I'm sure you guys will get to recap that next week. And thanks again for having me on.
Yes, thank you. And we will be back next Wednesday night for Let's Talk Short Track Racing.
Hi, my name is Joe Constance with Joe's Racing Products. My company has been producing high-quality racing components in the USA for over 30 years. We know the commitment and determination it takes to win races because we race too. We're determined to produce quality products that can help you get to the finish line first. Ask your dealer for Joe's Racing Products or visit us online at joesracing.com.
Buying or selling a home? It's more than a transaction, it's a strategy. I'm Amy Lynn, and I bring clarity, confidence, and results to your real estate journey. Whether you're searching for the perfect place to call home or preparing to list your home for top dollar, I've got you covered. With smart marketing, strong negotiation, and a network you can trust, I don't just help clients close, I help them win. Let's make your next move the right one.